Hey everybody, Who's Your Jedi here with another review for you. This time I'm talking this year's big three-way big crossover between the CW superhero shows, minus Legends, Elseworlds, and this story did not disappoint. There are definitely some flaws here and there, but by and large, this is a really good and fun story. So let's kind of get right into it. Honestly, the overall plot of what's going on here felt a little weak. Um, the whole thing with John Deegan and the Monitor, that's definitely one of the weaker parts of the story. But there is a lot of good stuff going on character wise. Um, Barry and Oliver each get to have really great moments with their wives. Uh, they each get some really interesting insights into each other. Um, you know, Trying to basically walk a mile in the other guy's shoes. I mean, there are some flaws to this, like Oliver, for example, sort of realizing, like, saying to Barry, like, you always seem like kind of make seems to really underestimate just how much of a tough life Barry has had. I mean, his mother was murdered and his father spent like 20 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. And Oliver seemed to focus on the rather superficial fact that Barry is despite that, a rather cheerful and upbeat guy. Um, but I do like that he did come around and realize that not everything is as easy for Barry as he seems to have thought. In a lot of ways, Oliver's the guy who, for the most, had spent the majority of his life having it pretty easy. He was a spoiled rich boy who basically got to do whatever he wanted. Granted, after he ended up on Lian Yu and right before, he went through some pretty hellish stuff. But, by and large, yeah. Well, of course, Barry was also spending a good chunk of that life living with Joe and Iris, and despite having that problem with his dad and mom hanging over his head, was leading a pretty decent life too. So I guess everything's relative. But nonetheless, Barry and Oliver do come to understand each other much better, and this really kind of parallels some of those really good Superman Batman stories, where particularly Batman likes to kind of give Clark a hard time about you're a cheerful guy, and yeah, sure, your planet was destroyed, but you grew up on this farm. You had these people that loved you, who were there well into your adulthood. I had my parents taken from me when I was still an elementary school kid. And usually when these stories are over, Superman and Batman have kind of understood each other a little bit better. I always kind of feel that Superman actually does understand Batman better than Batman lets on. I mean, better than he thinks, better than Batman thinks. But again, that's just my personal opinion. Anyways, of course, Supergirl is no small part of this, and she gets to have, in the final episode, a really great conversation with Superman, where he essentially officially puts the mantle of, the protector of Earth on her shoulders. I mean, he lays it on a little thick. And that is kind of one of my criticisms of Supergirl, is the show, when people are talking about, how great Supergirl is, and, how she is equally as worthy of wearing the House of L symbol on her chest as Superman is, they tend to lay it on a little thick. But, it's a flaw I can forgive. Just because in this day and age, Supergirl, fighting for that sort of equal place on the playing field, and just the way gender relations are in these days, yeah, it's definitely an uphill battle. So if you kind of have to lay it on a little thick now and then, well, there are certainly worse sins a show can commit. But there's just so much going on in this story that is actually really awesome. Barry and Oliver just endlessly bickering with each other, having these really fun moments. Barry finally gets his revenge by shooting Oliver in the back with arrows, which he's been waiting 4 years for, which was hilarious. And the great thing is that Oliver is positive that he's like, yeah, this is coming. I know what you're trying to do. And Barry just bluffs him. It's like, nah, come on, man. I'm not going to do that. And then he just laughs about it. He's like, yes, I've been waiting 4 years for that. There's other little things like Oliver and Lois Lane immediately getting off on the wrong foot. You can kind of tell that she's seeing a lot of Batman in Oliver and is immediately taking the side against him. Um, and of course, I mean, how can we possibly forget that this is they're using the Kent Farm set from Smallville. They're shooting there, and then when we go to the Smallville of Earth 38, they have the opening shot and the music from Smallville, and it's just like, oh my god, this is so great. I watched Smallville all the time back in college. It was literally for a number of years, when I was in college, my favorite show. I even remember that my mother had this really terrible habit of calling me when Smallville was on to have those I just wanted to hear your voice conversations that mothers love so much. It's just like, Mom, what? Why are you calling me? Like, there's really nothing important that you have to say to me. And after a while, I kind of basically said to her one time, like, look, Mom, call me anytime you want, except on Tuesdays when my favorite TV show is on. This 1 hour, please don't call me. And of course, she did. She would call me. And I remember one time I was talking to her and I said to her, Mom, you remember how I asked you not to call me during this 1 hour when my favorite TV show is on? Oh, I forgot. Another time. Oh, you know I don't remember things like that. I got so fed up with it. I literally, when the show came on, I would turn off the ringer on my phone. This is back when, phones attached to the wall were still kind of a thing. And then sure enough, like the next day, my mom calls me and she's like, oh, I tried to call you last night. You didn't pick up. And I'm like, yeah, did you try and call between this time? Yes. When my favorite TV show was on? Yes. Okay. And I flat out told her this. Yeah, Mom, I didn't answer because I turned off the ringer. Well, why did you do that? Because I told you time and again, please don't call me during this 1 hour of the week. I'm not going to answer if you do. And there was another time when I forgot to turn the ringer off. She called during that time and I ignored her. And I suppose this makes me seem like a dick, but this is just to go show you how much this show meant to me at the time. And frankly, whether or not, if somebody asks you for this 1 hour a week, please don't call me, that's not an unreasonable request. And the reason I really kind of rubbed that in her face was to drive it home. Mom, if I ask you for something this basic and simple, please listen to me, because I will just end up ignoring you if you continue to do it this way. And eventually my mom did stop calling me during Smallville. Of course, eventually Smallville kind of got to sucking. Oh, God almighty, that 6th season was terrible. 7th season was good. Well, final season was good. But geez, God, that 6th season was absolutely the worst TV season I can think of. Like, I mean, even worse than like season 1 Star Trek: The Next Generation. But anyway, okay, enough rambling about that. And honestly, it was kind of good to have a positive memory of Smallville pop up in the show, because the most recent thing we've heard connected to the show is that whole thing with Allison Mack and like being part of some weird sex trafficking, sex abuse cult. That was, well, obviously that was really bad for the people that were involved, and I was kind of bummed about that because I had a little bit of a crush on Allison Mack back when I was in college, so yeah. And I apologize for my hair looking like garbage. I got my hair cut 2 days ago, and it always takes a little while for my hair to sort of settle down after I get a cut. But anyway, getting back to the story, the whole thing with Barry and Oliver switching bodies. Okay, as people have pointed out, one of the big flaws is like when they're talking about this with the guys at Star Labs, they're all extremely skeptical about this, despite all of the crazy stuff that they have seen. We do finally, of course, get the answer to, hey, why aren't there any toilets in those cells? That was very nicely done. You know, having Grant Gustin record Oliver's dialogue from this current season of Arrow, also great. Um, and of course, you know, you have to talk about stuff like John Wesley's ship as the Flash of Earth 90. We get these. That was great. Definitely we have to take a minute to talk about Ruby Rose as Batwoman. When I first heard about this, I'm like, wait a minute, I know that name, and I looked it up, and it's like, oh, it's the really badass female assassin from the first John Wick movie. Okay, cool, yeah, she seems like a good choice for Batwoman. And here we kind of get a sense of like what's going on in Gotham. It's so bad that rich people travel around in APCs. Oliver hilariously says, "This is why people don't talk about Gotham." Also hilarious is that when Oliver is obviously intimidated by Superman's physique and he's like, "Are you puffing out your chest?" Yes. He doesn't even try to hide it. Um, anyway, the dynamic here with between Batwoman and the other characters, it's extremely reminiscent of how Batman acts whenever other superheroes come by Gotham, which is to say that he's an enormous dick. She does sort of eventually warm to Kara a little bit, and they do have some nice chemistry together, which has made people a little disappointed that this is Batwoman is going to be a part of Earth 1 and not Earth 38. But we know that Batman has been active recently, or on Earth 38 from Kara's comments. Well, hinted at that he's like, there's nothing weird about him going on with Batman on Earth 38. So setting it on Earth 1 makes the most sense. She's very street level sort of character, so having her interact with Oliver or Barry or well, maybe not the Legends as much, but it does make a lot more sense to have her sort of play around on Earth 1. You know, Arrow probably doesn't have a huge amount of seasons left, so having something that's in a similar vein on the same Earth, well, that just makes sense from a storytelling perspective. And you definitely got to love that moment where they find the little bust of William Shakespeare in Kate's office. That's obviously a nod to the 60s Batman show. The bit with, you know, World's Finest was laying it on a little thick. But again, you can kind of excuse stuff like that in stories like this. And of course, we get to go to Arkham Asylum, and I love that Oliver is extremely insistent, like, oh, Batman's a myth, and like, I'm the original vigilante. It's amazing how surprisingly insecure Oliver is when it comes to stuff like this. Let's see. So we get to see nods to like a lot of the classic Batman Rogues Gallery. If you're gonna have the Batwoman TV show, well, of course you're gonna want to have all the classic Batman villains. I mean, it just wouldn't be proper if you didn't. Let's see. We even get Psycho Pirate, which was great and makes sense considering, you know, next year they're gonna full on do Crisis on Infinite Earths. I guess the timeline on that got moved up by about 5 years. But anyway, let's see. What else do we need to talk about here? Of course, we get to see, you know, Black Suit Superman versus regular Superman. That was nicely done. Really, this I think is one of the probably like the biggest shining moment I've seen for Superman in quite a while. It's really good that they're sort of like, you know what, we've got Superman, let's let Superman be Superman. I've been hearing rumors they're talking about maybe some sort of a spin-off show down the road for this version of Superman. People are probably thinking it would probably be kind of him and Lois with their son John Kent, sort of maybe mining some ideas from the Super Sons comic where, you know, it's young Superboy hanging out with Damian Wayne. Again, interesting potential stuff there. It would sort of interesting to see like a Superman as sort of a family show. That would be a very different dynamic. But yeah, it does work here nicely. Also, I mean, the Legends weren't taking part. We did get to see a brief appearance by Gary. I don't especially like the character of Gary, but it was nice to know that they they hadn't forgotten about the legends. So good there. And of course, this all culminates in Oliver getting to have a nice little speech with the Monitor, and planting some seeds that look like, something pretty bad's gonna go down whenever this deal with Oliver made with the Monitor. Whenever we find out exactly what it is, it's probably going to be pretty bad. And yeah, I mean, this story did have its flaws, but there's just so many really genuine character moments, so many great nods to the mythology of the comics, so many really truly funny moments. And it's now a lot of things are in place for doing Crisis on Infinite Earths, which is probably the ultimate DC story. I mean, it is the most famous, the most well-known, the most legendary DC story, and arguably the most legendary single storyline in, mainstream comics. I mean, I can't even think of anything that Marvel has done that quite compares. And Marvel has had a lot of great company-wide, great, storylines over the years, but nothing that's ever really quite changed the universe, the Marvel universe, quite like this. The only thing that I can really think of that's on par with that over at Marvel would be something like the Dark Phoenix saga, which was ultimately an X-Men story. So yeah, Crisis. This is going to be good stuff. All right, guys, I'm going to call it here. As always, please comment, rate, and subscribe. And, of course, you can follow me on Twitter at Hoosier Jedi. And please also join me on Tumblr at Jedi Reviewer. Until next time, take care and have a good one.